Very good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to the fourth day of the International OM Lecture Series organized by Department of English, Onda, Thana, Mahavidyalaya. Today we have two very special guests, and we are lucky enough to have them with us to share their views on the topics they're supposed to speak on today. Anindya Sekhar, Purakayastha, the Professor, Department of English, Kazi Nazrul University, Asansol, West Bengal. And Anindya will speak on province worldling literature, writing from the south. And the second speaker in the panel is Dr. Sharbani Banerjee, and she is an associate professor, Department of English, uh, Triveni Devi, uh, Bhalotia College, that is the TDP College in short, in Raniganj, West Bengal. And she will be talking on Carnivalesque elements in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Anindya has strictly told me not to read out a long bio note, though he has many things to his credit. So, as he wishes, I will only announce that he teaches at Kazi Nazrul University and co-edits Kairos, the Journal of Critical Symposium. So, without wasting much time, because Anindya has a meeting by 12:30, so I request our honorable speaker, Professor Anindya Sekhar Purakayastha, to deliver the lecture. Sir, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Sourav, for the invitation and for the opportunity to speak on this specific subject. As I told him that to keep in mind the audio quality, uh, it would be wise on my part to keep the camera off and use the audio mic itself just to open it for a second and to wave everyone and to say hello and good afternoon. I will now close it off and would move on to the audio system to continue for today's talk. Right at the outset, I need to clarify that this is not going to be a full-fledged academic talk. It is more of a kind of an informal engagement with the question of literary worldedness, or world literature, quote unquote, as they say. And I specifically keep in mind the students of the college and also students, my erstwhile friends in Kazi Nazrul University. I can see Shoikot and Ontora and maybe others are also there. So really good to see them around. And as I said, that my sole objective here would be to address the students and to promote and encourage within them this provocative idea of problematizing the prevalent notion of world literature or literary world system, if I can say that. I will come back to the idea of the world system theory as theorized by Immanuel Wallerstein, who is very famous for conceptualizing this idea of the world system theory and how we can connect and engage with this idea of the world system with our practice and our theorization of literature, or world literature to be precise. Now, why do I direct this address to the students, as I said? The reason is that right from the honest days, I mean, I remember my own student times. We are flooded with European text. We all know that. The syllabi and the curriculum is already heavily tilted in favor of Euro-American text, which is understandable. And it is staple diet and staple item of discussion in the corridors of post-colonial theory, that we need to infuse the syllabi also with text from beyond Europe or beyond America. This is already old stuff. Everyone knows that. So nothing new in that sense. But I definitely keep that in mind. And while I keep that in mind that this is already well known, I would consciously re-engage with Dept Chakraborty's idea of provincializing Europe. And when I do that, I keep in mind the fact that when we talk about world literature, it is again deeply crowded with Euro-American texts. So I understand, and I would imagine that all of you will agree with me that the concept of world literature as it exists today is highly biased in favor of the first world text, if I can say that, Euro text, American text, or text from the first world, the developed world. Whereas the developing countries, the vast world of developing countries like South Asian countries, African countries, they do not have that kind of larger representation in the canons of world literature. Up to this also, this is quite well known, nothing new. But the question is that when we raise certain objections to these hierarchies of literary representations, when we see that the syllabus is, as I said, deeply inscribed in the Euro-American model, then the question arises that how do we concretize this objective of inscribing the syllabi within the rubric of the South or the global South? And when I say the global South, I do not just mean South Asia. I mean the entire geographical territorial stretch of the developing world, clubbing within it the entire African continent, South Asia, other countries like Latin American countries, etc. So as I said, the question is when a student begins literature in English, and this is something that I propose to my friends and my colleagues who are teaching in universities and colleges and in other institutes teaching English literature, or what we call the Department of English, that if we can adopt this conscious strategy of infusing the young minds with terminologies like literature in English instead of saying English literature, I think we can make some kind of a cognitive revolution in that sense, that we can bring within the conscious terrain of the minds of these young students the idea that literature as the study is not just English literature or British literature, but literature in English, which is also translated from other countries. Now, we all know that because there are texts from Indian authors, there are texts from other countries like Africa available in translation. But my humble submission is that it's not adequate enough to problematize the hegemony of European textual universe. It's too much with us. Now, does it mean that we develop a hatred for Euro-American texts? Certainly no. But I'm talking about a level playing field. I'm talking about a situation where there would be a greater democratization of the literary representation. And to achieve that and to actualize that, what we need is engagement with recent theories, recent discussions in the domain of world literature. New theories are coming up in this domain through the writings of scholars like David Damrosch, who teaches in Harvard University, who is currently editing a journal called World Literature, published by Brill Rodopi. And this journal, especially, has taken up this question of world literature, how to redefine, reformulate, re-engage with the question of world literature. And this is happening right now as we speak. It's very much contemporary in that sense. And therefore, as budding scholars, students who would be scholars in future, and we who are teaching in different institutions at different capacities, I think the onus is on us to encourage these young minds to think in a different direction, to understand that literature as they understand is not just Shakespeare or Milton. Time has come to reformulate, to reblood, if I can say that, the syllabi with newer voices, not just the voices that we are familiar with, like Naipaul and others. But it is high time that we make a kind of a vernacular invasion of the syllabus. And this I have been, talking about in various forums. And I do that with a specific purpose. And I think it is time that all of us, not just me, all of us speak about it more and more. That there has to be a greater presence of vernacular literature translated in the English language. And here I keep in mind Ngugi wa Thiong'o's idea of orature as opposed to literature, because his idea of globalectics as opposed to the dialectic is also crucial here. And Ngugi, perhaps all of you know, wrote a book called Globalectics, and there he challenged the Hegelian concept of the dialectic, saying that it is highly modeled and premised on the idea of the binary of the Europe and the non-Europe, the Europe and the other of Europe. So in this binary structure, the developed and the developing world are pitted against each other, and we cannot imagine the idea of a kind of a horizontal space of literary world or literary universe. So I think my friends in the colleges and my friends in the universities who are listening right now, may I appeal to all of them to imagine a situation where this hierarchy of representation and where this politics of representation, if you can say that, can be challenged and can be done away with. And we can do that by asserting on our end, from our end, more for local literature, local narratives. And I'm not saying that this we have to do just for the sake of doing it. No, there are great writers within our own culture. There are great writers within our own territorial boundaries, and not just within India. And when we say that, remember, I'm not talking about a nationalization of literature, certainly not. I'm talking about a transnationalization of literature in the true sense of the term. And what we mean by that we mean an actual practice of transcending the boundaries. And when I say transcending the boundaries, it means the linguistic boundary, the cultural boundary, the state boundary, the national boundary, etc., and the economic boundary. Now, as my time is limited, I would specifically refer to one particular book, and I again keep in mind my students there, my friends in the classes. Pascal Casanova, as a French literary theorist and a great writer and a great theorist on the world literature. She wrote a book, and the book was wonderfully titled. The name of the book was World Republic of Letters. You can understand, and I repeat for your convenience, World Republic of Letters. All of you are familiar with the term republic. We are living in a democratic country, and India is supposed to be a republic. And in a republic, we practice and we believe in democracy of action, democracy of theories, democracies of practices. And that is where the idea of the republic comes in, because in a republic, each and everyone are empowered to articulate his or her own voices. And keeping that in mind, we understand that the idea of the republic is opposed to the idea of the hierarchy or the idea of the hegemonic. So far, we understand and we all know through the writings of the post-colonial theorists that the world literary system, as Waldstein has said, is heavily biased in favor of Europe, as we said. And therefore, it is high time that we bring in this concept of a world republic of letters. It's a system or an imagination where all writers will be treated at par, will be given that equal status. And we will imagine that all of them are trying to do something in their own individual capacity to contribute in this vast stretch of the literary universe. It's an amazing imagination. It's an amazing idea to relocate and to reimagine the world republic of letters. So you understand that this republic of letters is a kind of a literary republicanism that prevents or opposes the prevailing system of world system theory or world literary systems. Now here I need to explain what do I mean by world literary system. Immanuel Waldstein, whom I named some moments back, and here I'm sorry I cannot speak more about them because of my paucity of my time. But those of you who are interested, they can Google search and can know more about these people, and that's my task. Within the span of 30 minutes, it's not possible to speak about all these people in detail, but this I can do. I can, provoke, and I can tease all of you and can encourage all of you to engage with these thinkers from today onwards, so that you can start thinking how we can reimagine the curriculum, the syllabi, and also our everyday pedagogical practices in the classroom and outside the classroom, in our thinking, in our imagination, in our epistemic practices, etc. Now, Waldstein said that the entire world is being governed by certain economic systems. And throughout our civilizational march, right from the beginning, the whole world has been determined, has been governed by these systems, economic systems. Earlier, it was, the industrial system. First, it was the feudal system, then the industrial system, then the capitalist system, and now we have the neoliberal globalized system. So throughout our history of civilization, human beings and each and every nation have been governed and determined by these systemic, forces and systemic dictates. For example, our geopolitical relations are all conditioned by the systems of economy. How this country will be connected to that country, this country will be related to that country, all are determined by this economic system. We all know that. We call it globalization, neoliberal capitalist economy, etc. Now, how do we connect the system, as Wollstonecraft said? He called it the world system theory, that the entire world is running because of these systems, these predominant systems which are controlled and dominated by the powerful countries of the world, the economic system at present, or the prevailing economic system at any particular chunk of time. During the feudal era, it was the feudal economic system. Then subsequently, during the industrial era, the industrial economic system, and blah, blah, blah. Now, how do we, as I said, forge a link between this world economic system or world system theory, as Wollstonecraft said, and the literary system, according to David Damrose and others, and what we call the Warwick School of Literary Theory. There is a literary thinker called Neil Lazarus, who has written a beautiful book called The Post-Colonial Unconscious. This is very interesting. We understand from the title itself that this is modeled on the Freudian notion of the unconscious. And Neil Lazarus has clearly argued in that book, and Lazarus is a professor of post-colonial literature in Warwick University. Together with him and Pablo Upamanyu Mukherjee and others, Benita Perry is another important member. They form the Warwick School of Literary Theory. And they have argued that Wollstonecraft's world system theory can be applied in the domain of literature as well, as the entire world and everything in this world are being governed by the economic model and the economic system. Similarly, in the domain of literature too, we are guided by and controlled by this system or world literary system. And in that system, Europe and America, European thinkers, American thinkers, European writers, American writers, European texts, whatever they do becomes news. Whereas, we do not know about our own writers. For example, I bet that many of us who are present here do not know perhaps the name of the writer who wrote this beautiful essay called Likhone Ki Ghote. His name is Omio Bhushan Majumdar, and he was a writer based in Kuch Bihar. He did his entire writing career when he was working in the Kuch Bihar post office. So we understand that along with Omio Bhushan Majumdar, we can name many other writers. I mean, in Bengal itself, there are wonderful poets and writers whom we do not know much about. Whereas we spend our times with all those texts in the syllabus about whom we cannot, or with whom we cannot relate in terms of culture, in terms of language, in terms of ideologies, but still they are there in their overbearing presence. So once a student or a teacher is conscious about this literary world system, then it becomes easier for him or her to challenge it and to oppose it in various ways. In policy formation, in terms of bringing in new text in the syllabus, or as I said, during their pedagogic exercise, when they teach or when they learn, this teaching learning process can also enrich, can also be benefited by this by this cultivation of these ideas, that how we can bring in local ideas, local narratives. And we can actualize Casanova's idea of world republic of letters, and how we can bring in orature, as Ngugi said, and can stop the predominance and hegemonic presence of literature, because literature is heavily elite in that sense, as opposed to orature of the local narratives, the tribal songs, the narratives, mythologies, and other things. So these are the set of ideas that we have to grapple with. And when we do that, and when we engage with recent ideas of, as I said, World Republic of Letters, New World Literary Theory by Damrose, there is another thinker called Feng Xia who has recently written a book on world literature. So when we engage with these new writings and new ideas, then we understand that, as Dipesh Chakraborty talked about, provincializing Europe, turning Europe into a province, stopping in that way the predominance of everything European. Similarly, we can claim and argue for worlding or world making within our own scope. We can say that this world of, say, Bankura, this world of Purulia, this world of Bardhaman, this world of Kolkata, this world of Chhattisgarh, this world of Madhya Pradesh, this world of Rajasthan, all these are fascinating worlds with narratives, writings, imaginations, folk songs, wonderful pieces of literary activities going on there. It's time that we make this world into a pulsating, vibrant world of literature. And how to do that? We can do that by making a claim for province worlding. And what I mean by that is that the province has always been detested and denounced as the narrow, as the small, as the local, which doesn't have much importance compared to the glorious world of Europe. That time is over. It's high time that we talk about how to make a claim for the world of the province, how to make a claim for the world of this small place, the world of the local. Remember, MS Dhoni was from Ranchi, and he began his journey in the Kharagpur railway station, and then ultimately ended up being the captain of India and challenged various first-ranking bowlers of the world and became a name across the board. So why not use that metaphor and analogy in the world of literature as well? We need to have that courage and that faith of conviction that the local is also enriched and redolent and empowered, capacitated enough to make a claim across the board. And that is the idea of the World Republic of Letters. And each and every voice matter, and we pay respect to that. So when from now on, we read, we keep in mind that Shakespeare is not the only voice. When we read, and we keep in mind that Henry James and others are not the only voice. There are wonderful pieces of writings within us and around us, and we need to restore the amount of respect and status that need to be given to those pieces of writings. And the more we do that, the more we can move toward the process of materializing the idea of the World Republic of Letters. So the concept of world literature today is not just the concept of world literature as Goethe talked of, as Rabindranath talked of, and others talked of. They did something great, but we have moved far ahead, and we need to engage more with the idea of the world economic order and how it is impacting our concept of literature and culture. And we need to engage more and more with new epistemic ideas coming out from scholars like Damrose and as I said, Casanova, Feng Xia, and recently Professor Boidik Bhattacharya, who teaches in, who earlier used to teach in Delhi University and now teaching in Center for the Studies in Developing Societies, where Ashish Nandi also works. He has also written a new book on world literature and doing post-colonial studies in the era of world literature. That is the name of the book of Boidik Bhattacharya. So these are fascinating pieces of new theoretic interventions, and students, scholars doing researchers, PhDs and MPhils, they will do well to engage with these new writings, new theorization, so that in future, as I said, we can open up new avenues for research in the domain of world literature. And finally, we can collectively promote and build a culture of world republic of letters in our everyday practices of teaching and reading and understanding of it. So as I said that my time is very limited, so I'll have to call it a day and call it quit now. And I think I can in future can have occasions to have questions and other engagement, but perhaps I'll not be able to take more questions, but I can take one or two questions if at all there is any question. Thank you.
Okay, I would request the audience, if you have a question, we can't take all the questions, only one or two questions will do. So the audience.
Hello, sir. Am I audible? Shoykot here. Hello.
Yes, you're audible.
Yes, Sekhar, go ahead.
Yes, sir. As you were talking about the politics of representation, right? So my question would be that how much do you feel that the other, as because you have also talked about the Eurocentrism and everything, then there is the idea of this otherization. So do you feel the other can at all be represented epistemologically, ontologically, and philosophically, or there is this politics of demonization and rumor and everything? Of course, I'm referring to Susanna Radstone's book, Memory and Methodology. And there is another thing that I would talk about the cataclysmic destruction of the history. And in this regard, I would like to refer to another book by Dipesh Chakraborty, is that reworking the history of the working class. So I would like to know your comment on these 2 points.
Okay, thank you. I can take one more question. If at all there is any, then I can answer both the questions together. Okay, fine. So I think the answer to the question of Shoykot is would be very simple on my part, Shoykot. No one is going to come and solve this for us. The onus is on us, and there is no magic. Remember, I said right at the outset that whatever I said today is nothing new. Knowingly I did that because I wanted to just bring in the discussion table new ideas emerging today on the concept of world literature. We all know about the idea of world literature. We all know about the idea of Eurocentrism. That is quite old stuff, as I said in the beginning. But currently, what is being written on that? Are we engaging with it? Are we on board with that? That's my point. And having said that, your question, as I said, that is it at all possible? The answer is that we have to think of it, and we have to, fashion out the answers for that. And as I repeatedly said, that this is possible only in our everyday exercise of engaging more with local thinkers, more with local writings, narratives. I mean, we have to situate ourselves within our own location. Only then we can answer the world in a better way. But are we doing that? Do we do that? That's the question. We can say a lot about those European writers, but are we at all practicing in our everyday exercise with our engagement with those? I mean, is there any conference on Bengali poetry today? That would be, we all imagine that would be organized by the Department of Bengali. And then we ask the question that who is going to solve the problem? Is the other going to be represented? The onus is, the responsibility is on us. Why are we expecting the Department of Bengali only? And why are we expecting, for example, I talked about the economic system. Do you perhaps many of you know that in Sanskrit there is a play called Mudra Rakhosh. I think this is a great play, and that we can talk of when we are talking about capitalism, we're talking about neoliberal capital. Why don't we bring in, as students of literature, this book, Mudra Rakhosh, and can see what the play talks about, and how beautifully Mudra has been compared with the Rakshasa, and how the demon and demonization of the space of capital can be discussed from a literary perspective in that way. So my point and my argument is this. I just wanted to provoke the students. I just wanted to problematize the whole practice of teaching and learning as we do in the everyday level. And my answer to your question would be that erasure of history obliteration of history, representation of the other. It all depends on us. There is no magic. We have to do it ourselves in our research, in our teaching, in our reading. That's all.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Sourav then. So I think it's done. So thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you, Anindya, for your illuminating lecture. And I hope that your lecture has really encouraged us to do more work on the world literature.
Hello.
Yes, Shamosri.
May I ask one question? I know I'm late and sir was asking for another question. Sir, may I ask one question? I'm Shamosri.
Oh, yes, please go ahead.
Sir, first of all, thank you for this wonderful lecture. I think for the first time I've heard the names of so many post-colonial thinkers whose names I never heard throughout my academic career. Okay, since I was a student and now that I am a teacher. So what I was wondering is that do you think that our academic academic space or our academia at present is free from the colonial hangover, because we always read the texts which are written by the maybe the Indian thinkers who teach in the universities abroad. We hardly know about the post-colonial thinkers like you, sir, who are in India, but we don't read about them or we don't read the works produced by them. So, what do you want to say about this?
Thank you, Samosri, for the question. But then, the answer would be the same again in that way. And I am quite notorious, and perhaps Sourav has got an idea of it through his conversation with me in the last couple of days, that I'm quite notorious when it comes to practices like organizing seminars and webinars. I have specific arguments for these kind of exercises. I believe that most of the times our seminars and webinars end up becoming talk festivals, and we just engage with all these things full of sound and fury, signifying ultimately nothing. But the best way to deal with such forums, we can do wonders. I am fully convinced that if all of us collectively work, and here I also want to drive away the hierarchies that exist in the world of academia, universities, colleges, this rank, that rank. These are all roadblocks that are there, that ultimately helps nothing and impedes in the world of actual academic exercise. So miles to go in that direction, but I think somewhere down the line somebody has to begin that. And my only hope is with young scholars like all of you, including Sourav and all of you present here, the students specifically who are studying in colleges and and in universities. So they have to be with this. They have to be moving with these things in mind, that these forums are wonderful to put our heads together and to do something meaningful, to engage with new ideas, to engage with ideas which are doing the round, so that we can challenge prevailing notions about literature and about culture, literary representation. So as you said that these names are quite new. What is the reason for it? The reason is that we continued engaging with old stuff, and whenever we offer anything new, we are always met with two stereotypical reactions. Our students cannot do it. They are not that advanced. That is the first reaction that we meet with. And the other one is that these are highly theoretical and highly difficult for many, and abstract in that sense. Whereas the basic premise of theory is that it is stemming out from life itself. I mean, Edward Said is nothing but deeply political when he wrote Orientalism. And Ngugi wa Thiong'o spent his days in jail. He wrote his first novel in the toilet paper. when he was in jail.
Devil on the cross.
He
Yes.
saw his own wife being sexually assaulted in front of him. So they had harrowing times, all these people, all these wonderful theorists and writers. So my proposition is that we, as scholars and teachers and students at different levels, need to continuously engage with whatever new ideas are being floating around, and instead of going with hackneyed stereotypical ways of looking into research and teaching, we need to every day engage with new ideas emerging, and new readers, new writers, new script writers, new forms of narratives and films, narratologies and everything. So we are flooded with all those things. There are so many wonderful pieces of writings, and we need to engage more and more with them in the form of research and our daily engagement, and then automatically it will come into the syllabus. So that's my only proposition in that sense, that we need to capitalize these kind of forums more and more, so that we can bring on the table, in the discussion table, new ideas, and that can be implemented in policy making. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Anindya, once again
Thank you.
for your beautiful talk. And I hope that,
Yeah.
like me, the audience is also quite illuminated and encouraged to take resort to the new emerging theories, and the and especially the regional literatures. And I understand, of course, and I hope that all the audience is also encouraged in it. Thank you very much.
If I can just add here, Sourav, because you referred to regional literature. When I say province worldling, I'm not actually talking about regional literature. What I'm suggesting is, or hinting at, is that the province has been, as I said, denounced, detested, neglected, or looked down upon as something which is not capacitated enough or eligible enough to register their voices. So that has to go. And when I say province, I'm not suggesting just, as I said, Purulia or Bankura or Bardhaman or Malda. I'm meaning that the whole South Asian region is viewed as some kind of a sweeping generalized province, a block, a territorial block, which is not eligible to write, to make their presence felt. So that has to go. So when I say province worlded or province worlding, I'm making a claim of representing the underrepresented, not just in terms of a territorial border, but also in terms of linguistic border, cultural border, and geographical border, definitely, but representing the underrepresented. That's the basic point, and that, as I said, is connected to Dipesh Babu's idea of provincializing Europe. So if we provincialize Europe, then we actually are making a claim for province worlding, that if the supremacy of Europe is gone, then all the other provinces are equal and at par with Europe. That's the point. So when we say that, then world literature doesn't mean the Euro-American literature. It has to be, as Casanova said, the republic, world republic of letters. And by the way, for the sake of everyone, Casanova also used a term called international literary criticism. These are fascinating ideas, international literary criticism, that when we adopt literary critical tools and we appreciate different literary works, we had certain, set rules and regulations. Either we use the new critical tools, the Marxian tools, or this tool or that tool, which are already well known. But can we adopt newer methodologies? And where Ngugi's idea of orature comes quite useful. And there are many other new ideas coming out. And as I said, that Damrose's idea of world making, which is now doing the round. Damrose, opened a new department of world literature studies in Harvard University, and he's still there at present. He's teaching there, and they often organize seminars, and this is for young scholars who are listening. They often organize conferences and seminars in that department of Harvard University. And even if you cannot go and participate there, at least you can keep in touch with these forums so that you know in which direction literary research is moving forward. So with that note, and thank you again. And I can see Sharbani there. So good afternoon, Sharbani, and I'm sorry I will not be able to listen to you, so my apologies. But with my best wishes, and
Thank you so much.
and thank you for thank you. Goodbye.
It's
Thank you.
always
Thank you.
a
Goodbye,
pleasure
Anindya.
to listen to you, Anindo. But you came
Thank
in
you.
early today.
Anindya,
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Sharbani. Yes, Sourav.
Okay, Anindya. Goodbye. Goodbye. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Thank you
Bye.
very much. See you
Bye.
later. Bye. Okay, so after the Parthuda, do you want to? Yes, Parthuda. You're audible. Go ahead, Parthuda. Hello. Hello. Parthuda. Dr. Parthasarathi Mandal is with us. He's the TIC of Manbhum Mahavidyalaya. I think that he has some network glitches. So after the illuminating lecture of Professor Anindya Sekhar Purakayastha, we shall now move ahead towards the second slot of this panel, and I will request Ashim Kumar Betal, faculty member, Department of English, Onda Thana Mahavidyalaya, to host the second slot of this
no,
web lecture.
no,
Okay, Parthuda. Now you're
no,
audible,
Sourav.
Parthuda.
Okay, let's. No, I will listen to Professor Sharbani Banerjee. Okay.
Do you want to say anything?
No,
I
no,
thought that.
nothing,
Okay,
nothing.
okay, it's okay.
I have nothing to say.
Okay, it's okay. It's okay. Okay. Yes. To conduct and host the second slot.
Sourav, nothing. I have nothing to say actually. I
Yes,
just
you're
wanted to thank Anindya only.
Special thanks to Dr. Purakayastha
No.
for his
Okay.
elegant observations. Myself, Austen Kumar Betal, faculty member, Department of English, Onda Thana Mahavidyalaya.
Okay.
And
It's
PhD scholar, LNMU, Darbhanga, Bihar. I again thank you all for being in this virtual platform. I also acknowledge the presence of our honorable second speaker, Dr. Sharbani Banerjee.
Sharbani Banerjee.
Sharbani Banerjee. Sorry. Sharbani Banerjee. Dr. Sharbani Banerjee, Associate Professor, Department of English, working at the Department of English, UG and PG, Triveni Devi, Bhalotia College, Raniganj. She has awarded with PhD. She was awarded with PhD in English Literature, Bardon University, 2004. Topic: Study of Lawrence Durrell's The Alexander Quartet. Dr. Banerjee, who has published widely and has been invited to numerous conferences in India, as also in the France, the United States, America, and abroad also. Her academic interests include post-colonial studies, feminine studies, gender studies, Indian English literature, modern and post-modern literature. Now she is going to address us with his topic, and her topic is Carnivalesque elements in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Dr. Sharbani Banerjee, please address us with your illuminating observations. Please, Dr.
Thank
Banerjee.
you very much, Professor. It is indeed a great honor to be invited. I would take this opportunity to thank Onda Thana Mahavidyalaya for inviting me, and I will if this talk is not interesting, I will blame Sourav for it, because he practically collared me in here at the very last moment with no time for preparation. So I seek your apologies right at the beginning. I have chosen a topic which would be useful. I think there are some sounds somewhere disturbing. Um, I would take this opportunity to introduce just a new aspect on a very old novel, Pride and Prejudice, which I'm sure that Sourav assured me that semester 4 and semester 6 students are already familiar with. And most of us who are of the teaching fraternity, we have grown up reading Pride and Prejudice. But as you can see, that I am talking on carnivalesque elements on Jane Austen's novels. Carnival as a concept, and I'm going to again speak this on behalf of the students. Carnivalesque elements in Jane Austen is important because Jane Austen has been misunderstood in many aspects as a very linear, a very a Victorian, pro-authoritarian writer who has never raised her pen. I'm not saying raised her finger. I said that she has not raised her pen for the causes of the nation at that time, or the causes of the world. Because remember, when she was born, the French Revolution was reigning in Europe. And yet, she is writing about the laid back family life of Victorian, neo Victorian England. So, before we come to Pride and Prejudice, Carnival has been very simply described as feasting before fasting. Carnival is a very popular and a very, enjoyable festival in Europe since the Middle Ages. And Carnival has been a kind of a festival before the Lent. 1 month of fasting was preceded by 2 or 3 days of feasting. But it was in our theoretician Bakhtin that Carnival gained new proportions and new, identity. Bakhtin pointed out to us that Carnival disseminated the unofficial culture of society and life and represented an overturning of the dominant authority. Now, very simply, what does that mean? Carnival is the time when all the, hierarchies of class, rank, position, everything could be overturned and subserved. The ordinary could make fun of the rich. The rich were disseminated. Their position was, broken down at least for those 2-3 days. The people who were subjugated under authoritarian rule, they could feel free. I often, this is also for my students here who are listening in, I also equate this carnivalesque element in Europe to the, color of festival in India, Holi, Dol. Holi was a time right from the Middle Ages, if we can say that it was propounded and brought about by Lord Krishna, but it was the time when in India the class structure was broken, at least for 1 or 2 days. You could put in color to everybody. The untouchable could touch the touchable, and the high could be, brought down to the level of the low. That was one day when Satyajit Ray's word, Dhore Maro Tan Raja Habe Khan Khan, can become a kind of a corollary and a parallel, only for one day. So Carnival was one such occasion. That was the time when society rules were broken and everyone became free and real. Bakhtin, when he talks about dialogism, he inevitably culminates in the Carnivalesque, which opened up new hermeneutic possibilities. Why? Because Bakhtin himself, having lived under an authoritarian restrictive order, felt that the carnival could be the only mode of restriction under tyranny. And what was the carnival's main weapon? When the sword failed, when even the pen failed, it was laughter that was the strongest and strictest, weapon against an authoritarian society. So carnivalization, it overcomes and overturn social hierarchies and literary cultures with what? With comedy and with humor. Because you have all studied Shakespeare, and you know how the fool, Touchstone in As You Like It, the fool in Lear calling him Nuncle, the fool had the power to break all rules and break all taboos. That again is another paper, I think, Carnivalesque elements in Shakespeare. Now, before I come to Jane Austen and her Pride and Prejudice, I will not waste my time discussing the story because all of you know the story. We will come directly to what Jane Austen attempted in her writings. You know, Jane Austen has written major 6 novels, and all of them were kind of laid back description of the country life when the world wars had not disturbed the British complacency, when world wars had not come to point out and show England in its eyes that it was not the best. So Austen was writing at a time when British predominance, British colonization, British trade, British commerce was the best. And yet, if we can read her novels between the lines, if we can trace the shadow behind her, description of ordinary life and ordinary sagas, we will be able to catch the criticism that she's venting out at society. And this has been corroborated not by just modern critics like Sandra Gilbert and Susan Goober, but even Ian Forster in 1923, he writes that when he read Austen, he read it with his mouth open and mind closed because he was so awestruck. Even Virginia Woolf remarked in the very same year in 1923, she said that had Austen lived a few years more, she could have been the forerunner of Henry James and Proust. Marvin Mudrick, in his book Jane Austen, Irony as Defense and Discovery, seeks to demonstrate how Austen took recourse to irony to expose the incongruities and the delusions of her contemporary society. So when we come to that path-breaking book by Sandra Gilbert and Susan Goober, The Mad Woman in the Attic. I will just come to The Mad Woman in the Attic in a few minutes about Charlotte Bronte. But she has devoted in this novel, in this book, 2 chapters on an imaginative and groundbreaking feminist rereading of Jane Austen. And they have declared that for all her ladylike discretion, Austen is rigorous in her revolt against the conventions she inherited. In this Mad Woman in the Attic, Jane is perhaps the greatest beneficiary of this feminist rereading. And also along with it is Charlotte Bronte, because not only is Mrs. Rochester, that mad woman in the attic, who has to jump from the landing and burn her. While she's burning, she burns the curtains and her room in the attic and jumps to her death very conveniently so that Jane Eyre can marry Mr. Rochester. That icon of the silent, neglected, subserved, subaltern woman has been taken up not just by Sandra Gilbert and Susan Goober. I'm sure my academic friends here on this forum will remember that Jean Rhys wrote that famous novel, The Wide Sargasso Sea, which could be a kind of a prologue to Jane Eyre, where she takes the woman in The Mad Woman in the Attic and traces her childhood and her growth and her journey to England. So you see, Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte have been rewritten, reassessed in this modern, dialogic, deconstructive, carnivalesque criticism as relevant not just in those days, but even today. Modern critics have indeed eulogized her overt criticism of the inequalities of her existence through the benign medium of the domestic novel. She's only writing about women finding men and mothers trying to search for grooms for their husbands and going to balls and dances, a domestic novel. My attempt in this paper is to look at the flip side of this interpretation, because Bakhtin posits that in a constricted society that is suffocated by powerful domination, only laughter is the weapon that is left in the hands of the powerless to protest, to revolt, and even to attack the oppressor. Just as the carnival was a site where social norms and rules were overturned, similarly, the Carnivalesque in literature is a medium of subversion and protest against the evils of society. But writing of Austen, ruffled a lot of feathers, and even the women, even her compatriot Charlotte Bronte, was not very happy with her presentation. And she writes in a letter to G.H. Lewis, she says that Pride and Prejudice was an accurate portrait of a commonplace face, carefully cultivated garden with neat borders and of a bright, vivid physiognomy, no open country, no fresh air, and there are many other no's that I have left out. I should hardly like to live with her ladies and gentlemen in their elegant but confined homes. So that was the, the negative response even from the women's side. Even Bradford, one of the critics, famous critics of Austen, she said that obviously Jane Austen's mocking was not at all sweet, sunny, natural gaiety. It had too much ill nature in it, so they thought that she was spiteful. Her people are all human, walking figures of flesh and blood, humanity. But like all true human beings, they have good and evil both. And her vision usually turns towards the evil, the foolish, and the ridiculous. Northrop Frye, when he was discussing Austen, says what normally happens in Austen's novel is that a young man wants to marry a young woman, that his desire is resisted by some opposition, usually paternal or societal, and that near the end, some twist in the plot enables the hero to have his will. So you see, what I am giving you, these slides are kind of, the kinds of reactions that Austen has been facing throughout the ages. Frederick Harrison wrote to Thomas Hardy, a fellow novelist, in 1913. Remember that Austen was dead by 1817. He writes, she was a heartless little cynic, was Jane, penning satires about her neighbors while the dynasts were tearing the world to pieces. This was a strong criticism against her because they felt that she did not talk about the French Revolution, she did not talk about the mass annihilation, she did not talk about, the rules of freedom, liberty, equality, and fraternity, but only writes about domesticity. But for the feminists, including myself, it is interesting to discover that while a feminist interpretation of Pride and Prejudice, or for that matter, Emma or Mansfield Park, is obvious, the author is not disturbed by the feminist issues alone. That is important, because she is also protesting against the society at large, its ways and its rules. She not only laughs at the men, but the women as well. No character is spared her caustic tongue, because she does not even, leave the characters who are feminine here. In Darko's influential analysis of the role of landed estates in Austen's fiction, he says that estates function not only as setting of action, but as indexes to the character and social responsibility of their owners. Let us now just discuss the men and the women separately. Then we will have an idea of what Austen is trying to criticize. When she comes to the men, Mr. Bennet, the male member of the family who is the father of the 5 daughters, husband to Mrs. Bennet, Austen is criticizing his indifference. the indifference that arises, that English that I have written there is not actually correct. It was very hastily done. It is an indifference that emanates out of superior knowledge, but that superior knowledge and superior intellect as compared to Mrs. Bennet. He had married Mrs. Bennet for her beauty, but then found her very commonplace and ordinary, not good enough to talk to, not good enough to um, uh, accord her the importance of his life partner, but rather he ensconced himself in his library and made nasty, jocular, witty, critical remarks about his wife as and when it was opportune. Throughout the novel, right at the point till Lydia runs away and elopes, he has been mocking his wife and making fun of her. And he is even indirectly, relegating the responsibility of the household, responsibility of the marriage of his daughters to the poor, incompetent, inadequate shoulders of Mrs. Bennet. When Lydia is allowed to go alone, traveling alone, Elizabeth Bennet, who only was possibly his only source of emotional, succor, she goes to her father and pleads with him, criticizes him not to let Lydia go out. But he turns an indifferent ear. That is why I have used the word indifference. Mr. Collins, we all know Mr. Collins. He is famous for his pompousness, his vacuity. Yet he is very, very aware of his key position as the future inheritor in the Bennet household. Mrs. Bennet is extremely agitated and worried, anxious that Mr. Collins should marry one of her daughters. Why? Because the rules of society in Austen's time said that a man, if he had an estate and he did not have a son, then the daughters could not inherit it. The inheritance would go to his near male relation. So you see, this is a very, 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 very strong point that Austen has, repeated in this novel, where she is not comfortable with this fact that women are, and remember that in Austen's times, women did not have any profession to follow. When we go to Jane Eyre, we see that Jane Eyre could only be the governess. That also was, sort of as a kind of a very lowly task, just a little better than the maid and the servant. So women of education or women of society could not have an occupation. They could not inherit their father's property or their husband's property. If she could not produce a son, she would have to depend upon marriage in order to get her future settled. That is why the famous beginning line in the novel, the beginning sentence in Pride and Prejudice, that a man of good, what was that famous line? That man of good estate must be in need, in want of a wife. I like to say that it is exactly the opposite, that a woman who is dowerless must be in search of a well-to-do husband. And that is the attempt that Mr. Collins is so confident. Mr. Collins, he is completely aware of his position in the Bennet household. And he is, trying to get an accomplished and good wife. He is looking for beauty in the Bennet girls. He has intention of marrying one of them. He has come bride hunting, which was usual in society. But Austen, through Collins, is criticizing his clinical, almost pathological approach to the issue. The readers have a hearty laugh at Collins's expense when he shifts his choice without batting an eyelid upon hearing his first choice, the beautiful Jane, was about to be engaged to Bingley. He cannot accept Elizabeth's firm refusal by thinking that it is coquettishness, because he cannot imagine that anybody should ever deny him, because he is the future owner of the Bennet property. And when Elizabeth refuses, he takes sweet revenge by choosing Charlotte Lucas, the plain girl of the neighborhood. Then I come to Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy is he is the pride of the character, of the title of the novel, that he represents pride. What is he proud about? What personal, special accomplishments does he have? He is proud of his place. He's proud of his property. He's proud of his social position. But there is no personal accomplishment in any of those prides. And yet he chooses to look down upon the ordinary men, to laugh at them, to cynicize them, and even the manner in which he is proposing to Elizabeth is a kind of a battle which he has won, that he has, sort of warred with himself, and he has allowed himself to get down in society. Mr. Bingley, of course, represents the nouveau riche, the new rich man that represents the post-industrial revolution England, a new breed of young men who were rich, all of a sudden. But he represents weakness, a kind of Hamletian indecisiveness. He cannot decide. He loves Jane, yet he listens to Darcy and his sister's ministrations and leaves her in the lurch and goes away to London without thinking twice about the effect that his rejection might have. And then it is just a stroke of luck that Darcy changes, and Darcy allows Mr. Bingley to change. When we come to Wickham, I like to think of Wickham as the Edmund of Lear, just as Edmund was not happy with the benefactor role of his father. Similarly, Wickham represents lack of loyalty to the senior Mr. Darcy, who brought him up like a gentleman and allowed him enough education that he should have got a position in the army. He does his best first to run away with Darcy's sister, and then when that is not accomplished, he comes to disturb the Bennet household. When Elizabeth will not be prompted to run away with or to be in a romantic relationship with him, he takes the opportunity to run away with Lydia and does the most unmanly, act of all, when he actually plans to leave Lydia in the lurch, and a dishonest woman who has spent a few nights with a man and has been left in the lurch. If you have read Charles Dickens, you know what Steerforth did to little Agnes and how he paid with his life. Such was the seriousness of Wickham's action. It took Darcy and his changed persona to bring the matter to a respectable and acceptable solution. What I am trying to say is that Austen, through the male characters, she is not really being strongly feminist. And I'm famous for talking about feminism. Here, at least, I am not. What I am talking about is that she is showing how the society of her times, how the menfolk of her times all had feet of clay. Though they pretended to be superior, they were not. And it is true. How is she revealing these weaknesses? She is revealing them by mocking at them, by laughing at them. That is her only weapon. As I said, that this is not a feminist edict. She has not spared the women either. Mrs. Bennet, of course, is the famous example, and you all know that this Pride and Prejudice novel was, adapted into a play called I Have Five Daughters. And Margaret McNamara, the famous stage personality, has made Mrs. Bennet almost an iconic figure of laughter. But why are we laughing at Mrs. Bennet? Have we thought about it? She is an ordinary, commonplace woman, an unfortunate mother of 5 girls. She has no male child, and she is always afraid that upon the death or demise of Mr. Bennet, this estate will go to Mr. Collins. So she needs to see all her 5 daughters respectably married. Is that too much that a mother is asking? And if she is going, overboard with it, if she is acting as per her social upbringing, is that a crime? And why is Mr. Bennet also laughing at her when he married her, knowing her to be a woman of common upbringing? That is what even her sisters and sister's husband are shown to be, working commonplace couple, but who are educated and respectable. When she is discussing Jane, she is the least critical because she represents Jane as a beautiful, dignified, gentle girl, representative of, late romantic, new Victorian society, who is beautiful and who is respectable. She does not cheapen herself like her mother or like her younger sisters. She does not run to the town just to see the soldiers walking by so that she can bat her eyelids at them and catch a snare. She attracts Mr. Bingley for her beauty, and yet she is left in the lurch by Mr. Bingley. She has nothing to do but to, feel sorry for herself and to wallow in the sadness of rejection for which she knew no reason. Elizabeth, of course, is the second representative of the title. If Darcy represents pride, Elizabeth represents prejudice. This we all know, even my students know. They are preparing answers for that. But Austen also criticizes Elizabeth, not only because of her prejudice. She criticizes Elizabeth because though Lydia is blamed, Elizabeth had also been moved by the charm of Wickham. And when do we find in the novel that Elizabeth changes her opinion of Darcy? When she visits Pemberley, when she goes to Darcy's huge estate, those rolling hills and the huge house, palatial in its structure, and the great organs playing, and the marble splendor of the house and the country. And she imagines herself to be the reigning lady of this house and this whole estate. So is Elizabeth, even though she's prejudiced against Darcy, is she also above and beyond those other females of that time who were looking for a profitable marriage? Because remember that all these girls were dowerless. They did not have any dowry to carry with them. Mary and Kitty, or Catherine, they are, mirror images of the flighty, shallow, stupid, laughable qualities of Mrs. Bennet. And Austen laughs at them because they are the progeny of everything that Mrs. Bennet represents. Charlotte Lucas is perhaps the only character that Austen paints with sympathy and sadness. She is not so good looking. She is not so young. She does not have any dowry. So she is forced to accept Collins's proposal. And when Elizabeth accuses her of, compromising with her love and with her emotions, Charlotte says, I was never romantic. I would rather be, satisfied if I have just a corner of my own, a house of my own, and an identity of my own. When Elizabeth visits Charlotte's house in her married place with Collins, Elizabeth sees that Charlotte is in her corner. She is not really very happy, but she is not really sad. And when she's serving tea in her teapot, Charlotte tells her, you see, I'm so happy to have a house of my own. So this is the plight of the woman. And when most cases Austen is laughing at them through her tongue-in-cheek attitude to society, this is one case where she's not laughing at all. Even Lady Catherine de Bourgh, she is rich, she is well-to-do, but she is also the mother of an only girl child. Though her property is entailed in such a manner that her daughter will retain her wealth. But in those times, a woman without a husband, a woman without male protection is something that is shocking, is something that is unacceptable. And so Lady Catherine de Bourgh is also desperately searching for a husband of her daughters, for her daughter. When she runs to to Elizabeth Bennet in order to stop this marriage, and she remarks that your father's estate is entailed on Mr. Collins. I think for your sake, I'm glad of it, but otherwise, I see no occasion for entailing estates from the female line. So Austen is pointing out that entailing estates to male members is not a happy and not a very praiseworthy thing to happen. So as Gilbert and Gobar has explained, that Austen examines the female powerlessness that underlies monetary pressure to marry, the injustice of inheritance laws, the ignorance of women denied formal education, the psychological vulnerability of their heiress or the widow, the exploited tendency of the spinster, the boredom of the lady provided with no vocation. And who knows it better than Jane Austen? Because she is one of those women who died a spinster at the age of 41, 42. Her life story, her biography will tell you that she was engaged twice, but she did not carry them over to marriage. And she must have felt the pressure of marriage, the pressure of, uh, having to live her life with at least with the support of some male protection. So
I think there is some technical problem on Sharbani's part. I'll request the audience to wait a few minutes so that she may join us again. Okay, she's back. You have muted yourself. Sharbani, you have muted. Okay, it's okay.
Yes. Sorry, I did not realize actually net is very bad because of the rains today. I don't know where I had stopped, but I was just concluding. What I was trying to say is that with nothing in her arsenal except laughter, she utilizes it to attack all her realities and thereby justifies the carnivalesque tradition. Following the path shown by Bakhtin, we realize that just as carnival is the site of criticism of a culture whose distortion of social hierarchical order is an implied attack against authority, homologically, a novel is the site for implicit criticism by the author whose only weapon is laughter, parody, and satire. Emphasis on the carnival tells us that majority of the literary works are all multidimensional and have many roles to play. Bakhtin asserts the openness and freedom of literary texts. Austen's novels also oscillate between yes, Gilbert and Gruber also said that. Oscillates between mockery and sadness. She writes under the garb of laughter, the devastating mockery of carnival literature. I will conclude by quoting Mark Twain in his response to Pride and Prejudice. He read Pride and Prejudice and he was so angry. He was so angry that he wrote that her books madden me so much. I can't conceal my frenzy. Every time I read Pride and Prejudice, I want to dig her up and hit her over the skull with her own shin bone. Thank you. That is the kind of anger that she generated in the patriarchal civilization of her times and also later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sharbani, for illuminating and thought-provoking observations. And she has observed so minutely carnival's elements in the novel Pride and Prejudice. You have made wonderful observations for us. As you earlier said that the students of the fourth sem under Bakhtin University would be more benefited. I also think so.
Thank you.
But now the floor is open for interactive session. If anyone of you who wants to ask any questions or make any observations or add anything, please you can make a comment or add anything or ask any questions to Dr. Banerjee. Please.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, this is
Good afternoon.
Bhavya. Yeah.
Yes.
It was a wonderful lecture indeed. I just have one query in my mind, and I have jotted it down actually so that I can be as clear as possible. So the thing is that keeping in mind the various critical opinions which you talked of in the lecture, particularly that of Charlotte Bronte, can we say that Pride and Prejudice ceases to be a female Bildungsroman because the Bildungsroman demands some sort of development of the protagonist, often through education and travels, which in turn was not possible during Austen's time in her society, in the society in which she lived and in which she created all her creations. So, is it so, ma'am, that we cannot call it a female Bildungsroman?
No, you see, I have never thought of Pride and Prejudice as a Bildungsroman because Bildungsroman necessitates, the growth of a character. It may not be the physical growth from childhood to maturity, but it also should entail psychological growth. For instance, if Portrait of the Artist is a Young Man by Joyce is a Bildungsroman and a Kanzlerroman, and even Jane Eyre can be a Bildungsroman because we see Jane Eyre from her school times. She's a child, she's a young girl, and how she gradually matures and she gains her position in society from an orphan to the respectable Mrs. Rochester. So I will have to think about it, because I have never thought of Pride and Prejudice as a Bildungsroman, because we find the girls mature. We only find them searching for
Husband.
I don't like to say husband. I like to say that they are trying to find a solid foothold in society, you know.
Yeah, but they could do it through education also. Why they are in the search
No,
of
no, no,
this,
no, 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 no. You have to remember that in those days, in the times when Austen was writing, this was written and published in 1813.
Yes,
In
yes.
1813, women were not allowed a vocation.
Yeah, exactly.
Women were not allowed higher studies. In America, in the 1800s, when a few educated women got together and somehow they were wearing blue stockings, they were laughed at, called the Blue Stocking Brigade.
Yes,
আমাদের দেশে
yes,
যেমন
yes.
মেয়েরা লেখাপড়া শিখলে they were called বিদ্যাসাগর হবি নাকি? So in America they were called blue stockings. So education and profession was not an option. I mentioned this in my talk, that maybe being a governess, being a maid, or you had to marry and become rich, or you had to be an
Cambridge,
soldier.
yeah.
Exactly. I hope that
Okay.
answers your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so
I
much.
just want to mention one thing in this forum. I can see there are still 80 of you here. When I was in school, I studied in Loreto Convent, and I have 5
Okay.
daughters was enacted. And my closest friend, I say my second soul, she's here today,
Okay.
listening in. She had acted as Mr. Bingley. And so may I say that the inspiration of my talk here is sitting there smiling at me. And she is a strength in my life. And so whenever I talk of Bingley, I don't think of an English gentleman. I think of her with her mustache and her coat as she acted on stage. Okay, thank you. Now I'm ready for the other questions if there are any.
Okay, Sharbani, yes, while you are answering the first question that there is no development. One thing actually struck me. Uh, you can tell me whether I'm true or false. Actually, there is a development, a psychological development that is taking place
Definitely.
in the characters of both Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, because at the end of towards the end of the novel, Elizabeth and Darcy both overcome their psychological constraints. For example,
Absolutely. I
yes,
agree with you completely. I was about to tell her that, you
yes,
see, if there is no psychological growth, if there is no psychological change, it need not be growth. It can also be regression, you know, a kind of a Macbethian regression from Bellona's bridegroom to the deadly butcher. If there is no movement, psychological growth or movement, then a novel does not stand. A novel is not a novel. The importance, even you see, even in stream of consciousness novels, in the novels, magic realist novels like Salman Rushdie, even Salim Sinai, even Sofia Zenobia in Salman Rushdie's Same, they are transforming. Even they are, you know, emerging. I can call Salman Rushdie's Shame a Bildungsroman, because in Shame, the birth of Sophia Zenobia, her upbringing, her marriage, her change into that, you know, that sort of that magic realist bestial character, almost a lioness in the forest who rejects all civilized norms. That is a Bildungsroman. But in Pride and Prejudice, of course, there is maturity. Of course, there is a growth. Of course, there is a change. But that is psychological. If we take the very, the basic meaning or definition of a Bildungsroman, well, I have my doubts. I'm sure
yes.
we are always ready, you know, agree to disagree with each other. Because that
No,
is what
yes.
literature is all about.
It's actually a Spanish genre, and obviously that has different elements.
Absolutely. Because if David Copperfield is a Bildungsroman and a Kanzlerroman, if portrait is a Bildungsroman and a Kanzlerroman,
Roman.
in the same vein, Pride and Prejudice does not really sort of match. That is what I think, of course.
Uh, I'd request Roshan Kaur Betal to take questions. Request the audience to ask questions. Hello, you are actually muted probably. Yes, you are muted. Please unmute yourself.
Anyone who wants to ask any questions? Mohua
Hello.
Kundu,
Yes,
if you have any questions.
I don't have a question. I am here as a friend listening into my friend, and I'm superbly impressed. We had done Margaret McNamara's I Have Five Daughters in school, as she mentioned. I think most of us can relate to Pride and Prejudice because it reflects our society to a certain extent. A mother with five daughters, primarily worried about getting her married off. It still holds true for our society. So that's why I think we can relate to Mrs. Bennet's predicament much better, I think, than any other country. So I thank you, thank you, Sharbani. I think it was lovely and enriching, and I really enjoyed listening to you. And you made it so simple and so interesting.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your warm words.
Thank you.
Anyone who have any questions? Hello.
I think everybody wants their lunch now.
Yes, ma'am.
It's over the lunch time.
Sir, I think NGM sir wants to say something. Sir, please.
Okay, first of all, Sharbani ji, first of all, thank you for this illuminating lecture. We thoroughly enjoyed, as Nilanjana ji said also. We really enjoyed your lecture, and not only me, but my better half was also there to enjoy the lecture. And we both
Thank you for your
enjoyed your
social
lecture, and yeah, thank you so much for whenever we get such chances of listening to you. That is really a feast. It's really a kind of feast to our eyes, and also something that we cherish, and we really cherish for long. Anyway, what I would like to add here is that there is upheaval. If we say that in Carnivalesque, in the very concept of Carnivalesque, we find some kind of upheaval. That means some kind of disorder that is accepted for a particular day, or maybe for a particular period. So some kind of disorder accepted, disobeying the authority, or rather disregarding the authority, and then asserting one's freedom, one's individuality. Now, here in Pride and Prejudice, we find a number of characters doing that. That means bringing about or defying the authority, disobeying their authority, and asserting their individuality, their freedom. For example, Elizabeth herself does, and so does Lydia, particularly. So these two characters particularly defy the authority if their parents are the authority. Then definitely, and again, if the social structure is the authority, they are definitely defying that authority. And thereby we find again some sort of carnivalism, or some sort of carnivalesque rather. Now, am I right really, Sharbani?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, those of us who have read Austen and we are familiar with Austen, and who have been later inducted into the theory of Carnivalesque by Bakhtin, we have not only found it in Austen but also in many other texts. You know, then we think and say that, oh my God, here is that mode, because in Austen's time, had she written a very revolutionary novel, there was every chance that she would not have been allowed to publish. The authoritarianism was such. So she was writing a novel for the common public. She was writing the novel for the pleasure and titillation of the, the novel reading society that was popularized by Dickens when he began to write serialized novels that became so popular in those times. So Austen was, banking on popular acceptance. So she was writing what the populace would be happy with, what the populace would accept. And yet, she was sort of weaving her protest, her anger, her, shall I say, negativity against, feelings of negativity against this supremely authoritarian regime through the laughter. Because you see, the comments of Charlotte Bronte that I showed in my PPT, the final comment by Mark Twain, that he won, he's so angry. It is reminding of Rajshekhar Bosu যে সেই হরিণা তোরে পোড়াবো না তোরে নিয়ে যাবো ধাপা দেবো মাটি চাপা সার হয়ে যাবি ঢেঁড়স ফলাবি, something like that. He says that I want to dig her out of her grave and break her skull with her own shin bone. Such is the anger that she has generated. So when we say that she is writing a domestic novel, how cleverly and how surreptitiously she has used the, what we call it Carnivalesque today. I'm sure she did not do it with our theoretical knowledge, but she does it with her gut feeling. She does it that this was the only way by which she will at least be able to, make herself partially heard. I absolutely agree with you, Narugopal. And fantastic. And thank you for the special best of luck right at the beginning of this session.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Dr. Mukherjee. Now I request to Dr. Nag to conclude the program.
Okay, we have special news for tomorrow's panel. Tomorrow we are going to have 3 speakers, and there will be 2 panels. The first panel will commence from 9:30, and Professor Amrit Sen will be lecturing on 18th century novel, and he has promised me that this lecture is going to be an asset. Okay, for the students to come, it will be an hour long lecture. The second panel includes 2 distinguished speakers, Dr. Shubhadeep Paul from Bangalore University, and my very favorite Pinaki De. And yes, so I hope that tomorrow we shall enjoy a lot. And thank you, the audience, for supporting us, for enjoying the lecture and participating in the web lecture series. I'm really grateful to you, Sharbani. Thank you. You you gave your consent in such a short time. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm indebted to you. So let us call it a day now. Thank you, Nilanjanadi, for joining us. Thank you. Okay. Goodbye till tomorrow.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.